The old Commodore Amiga was a gaming powerhouse, but it wasn't really built for 3D, though of course nothing back then really was. The groundwork for the 90s 3D revolution was though certainly laid in the 16-bit era, with the original Amiga lineup seeing more than a few innovative and ultimately pretty influential titles. It's probably here, more than anywhere, that the Amiga's limits were pushed the hardest, both technically and in terms of game design. So in part 2 of my look at games that pushed the limits, I'm going to be taking a look at just a few, a brief sally through some of the games that took this machine to the edge of what it could do with an added dimension. So let's not tarry any further, and I'll let the first game introduce itself. If you want to know what 1986 sounded like, well, it sounded like that. A unique loading jingle, which does set the scene pretty well. The actual title music is a bit of a disappointment after this, but the rest of the game does make up for it. Yes, this made a fairly early appearance on the Amiga, not the first 3D game here, but probably the first one worth talking about. A multi-platform game including some very brave 8-bit conversions, it probably shone the brightest on the Amiga though, no surprise really given this machine's power. You may notice a passing resemblance to the Star Wars games, and well, that's no accident, as this started out life as exactly that, a conversion of the Star Wars arcade games. Atari, it seems, pulled the plug on programmer Jez San, something we can be thankful for really, as, undeterred, he turned the project into its own thing, and well, very fine it is too. Unapologetically arcadey in its gameplay, it still has a fair amount of depth and originality. Its intuitive analog mouse controls and pretty solid frame rates mean that this has aged a lot better than most other similar games, a solid technical achievement that still plays well. Starglider was though almost immediately superseded by its direct sequel just a year later, the predictably named Starglider 2. Technically, this was better in every way, a worthy successor to a game that was already pretty jaw-dropping. Okay, it did lack the introductory jingle, it didn't even have any title music as it turns out, though it did have its own theme supplied on a cassette in the box, but anyway. In nearly every way this was better than the original, the wireframe graphics replaced by filled polygons, and the game world massively expanded into an entire planetary system, complete with moons, gas giants, and literal run-ins with space whales. The mammal at least, not the country, although that would have made for a hell of a minigame. Complex as it is, it manages to offer seamless, load-free transitions between planetary surfaces, orbits and deep space, all whilst cranking out frames at a very playable rate. Yes, maybe something other 3D Amiga games could have learned from. Whilst the draw distance is low, even when things get busy, the action never gets too bogged down. Once again, you may notice a passing resemblance here, this time to Nintendo Star Fox, and again this is no accident. It was programmer Jez San and his company Argonaut who would go on to work with Nintendo in the creation of Star Fox and the Super FX chip that made it possible. A demo version of this very game running on the Super NES apparently being the spur to Nintendo's involvement. Yeah, we like this a lot, says Nintendo. Maybe make it a bit less complicated, bit more focused, levels instead of an open world perhaps. How about we have a fox driving the spaceship maybe? Ooh, and how about an annoying toad that speaks gibberish and all the baddies are dogs? It'll be a hit. And of course it was. Star Fox being Nintendo's first foray into 3D, a medium they would make themselves very much at home in the 90s. So how can we top this? Where do we go from a game that in a roundabout way led Nintendo into another dimension? Well, how about what's maybe the world's first 3D open world sandbox game? Yes, from 1991, it's Hunter. On the surface, it is a little primitive to modern eyes. The frame rate, well, it does have one. Polygons, there's a few. Physics engine, not really. Detail, well, not a lot of it. Camera controls, no. But what this does have is ambition. Lots and lots of ambition. Yes, it's got a huge low poly world for you to explore. Sea, land, buildings, stuff to blow up, critters to run over, vehicles to crash. A very early blueprint for a type of game that would become a massive deal in the hands of giants like Rockstar and Ubisoft. Admittedly, this game wasn't completely without precedent. A few games had already started out in this direction. Coder Paul Holmes cited 8-bit classic Mercenary as an influence, and Mike Singleton's Midwinter was another precursor. But this though went further, offering a larger world with more possibilities, more freedom, more open-ended gameplay than anything that had been seen before. Like the games that came after it, there is a mission structure here with tasks to complete, but well, unsurprisingly, so much of the best fun to be had is from just messing around in the world. Something that the developer must have realised, because you're given plenty of opportunity to do just that. Swim, walk, sail, ride, drive all over the islands, get in random tank battles, fly a helicopter, get run over by a truck, you know, all the stuff that makes open world games so compelling. All of this crammed into just one disc by just one man, an audacious feat of coding where limits were pushed further in many ways than anything else on the Amiga. It does have its problems. A brief dip in will reveal glitches aplenty, but it's so innovative, such a creative and technical leap that it seems a bit mean to pick holes in it. Yeah, a game that shows its age with all its jank, but I enjoyed having a go on this much more than I thought I would do. A real pioneer that's still a bit of a laugh to play. It got good reviews at the time, but it seemed to sink off the radar pretty quickly afterwards, and it's not all that often talked about today. A shame really, it might be a bit too lo-fi for most people now to sink much time into, but this game does deserve to be remembered. Alright, we may struggle to top that in pure innovation, but I think now would be a nice time to switch genres entirely and take a look at another area where the Amiga paved the way for what was to come, the 3D Racer. And where better to start than with Stunt Car Racer. A game that never had any pretensions to being realistic with its car chase physics and its cartoonishly outrageous tracks, and set itself apart with its unique look and feel. Yeah, those frames don't happen quite as often as you'd like, but by the modest standards of the era it does well. A bit choppy for sure, but at least predictably so, and well, good enough to make this game work. And what a gem it is, one that still feels like a lot of fun to play. What stands out most to me though is just how good the controls are. Yes, it uses the rather limited single button stick of the Amiga, but it feels fantastically well tuned for it. It's forgiving enough that even a beginner can more or less get round the track, but still flexible enough to give it some genuine challenge as the game progresses. A low skill floor and a high skill ceiling in modern parlance, something that games of this vintage often lacked. Unsurprising then that this was a big hit that a lot of people still love, probably the game I got suggested the most for this video. Despite this game's detachment from reality, creator Jeff Crammond's next game was a racer very much grounded in the real world. It's Microprose Formula 1 Grand Prix. A full-on simulator that at the time offered a level of detail and immersion that nothing else could quite match. Realistic depictions of then current F1 tracks and a hugely impressive physics engine made this game a more lifelike evocation of real-world racing that had ever been seen before. Although it did offer help in the way of driving aids, this was never going to be all that casual friendly. A serious game that offered a more serious challenge. A fair old leap from Stunt Car Racer really. Personally, well, I don't like it. It's all a bit too complicated for my simple brain. As nothing more than a very casual racing fan, I don't really have the patience or the wherewithal to get into it properly. I do suspect it's a bit above any criticism that I can level at it though. It was very highly regarded at the time and still is today by those in the know about this kind of thing. More importantly, it did what we came here for. It pushed the limits of the Amiga. The frame rate might not have been great on a stock 500 at least, but the depth of the simulation was stunning. A benchmark in the world of racing games that did a great deal to take them away from their purely arcade roots and give them a dose of realism. Now, the final racer I'm going to look at, one that I found a bit less taxing on the old grey matter. It's no second prize. If you want to know what 1992 sounded like, well, it sounded something like this, or it did if you were a German demo coder. The intro should clue you in. This was created by former demo sceners, and they clearly knew what they were doing, a technically accomplished game that plays extremely well. It calls itself a simulation, but well, it's not really, not like Microprose Grand Prix was, but on the other hand, it's not quite a physics-defying joyride either, a nice balance in fact. The mouse is the sole input, and at the time I think this may have raised a few eyebrows, but for a modern gamer where all kinds of analog controls are a fact of life, it seems like they made the right choice. As you can no doubt tell from my inept playing, it's pretty difficult to get a grip on it, but I would say difficult in a good way. Difficult in a way that gives a depth and sophistication without being completely overwhelming, and when you do finally manage to get the bike back on the track, and even round the odd corner, it's pretty satisfying. In fact, it feels much more like a modern 3D racer than nearly anything else from this era. But the most impressive feature here is surely the performance. It's fast, it's smooth, and that frame rate is pretty rock solid. Yes, the efficient coding skills these guys display here is second to none. Some visuals are sacrificed in aid of keeping those frames coming, it's pretty low poly, the draw distance is limited, but it plays so much better for it. Even if you're a demanding, performance-obsessed modern gamer, this is probably still playable. Much more so than most other 3D Amiga titles. Sega's Virtua Racing came out the same year in the arcades, and this would be the closest you would get to that experience at home for a good couple of years, a classic that had the market largely to itself. This, alongside Starglider 2 being, I would say, the two games here that hold up the best today. You know what, I'm very tempted to end the video here, go out on a high note, leave you with some pleasant remarks about how much I've enjoyed going through these old games, maybe sign off and encourage you to subscribe, leave a comment, that sort of thing. But I don't think I can. I don't think I can leave it here as much as I'd like to. Too many have suggested this next game, it's too much of a big deal for me to ignore it. But it isn't pretty. Yes, it's Frontier Elite 2. A game that's pushed the limits certainly, pushed them a bit too far. Yes, even the intro does not bode well. This is slow, very slow, perhaps a little bit, actually no, a lot. Too demanding for old school Amigas, and things don't improve once you get into the game. Yes, this has all the frame rate and frankly all the thrills of a slideshow of your school's geography field trip. Less so maybe, because here you won't even get the pleasure of reliving the moment that one kid dropped his Game Boy down Wookiee hole. Yeah, you could change the transparencies on an old school overhead projector faster than the Amiga 500 can serve up frames in this game. People apparently did struggle through with this back in the day and seemed pretty happy about it too, presumably heading out for a bite to eat between particularly taxing frames. But in the 21st century, you don't need to be a PC Master Race frame rate Nazi to think that this is all just too cripplingly slow, and I would be willing to write this game off entirely if it wasn't for one thing. Yes, I can hear you say it. This is never going to work on a lowly Amiga 500. You need something with much more grunt to get the best out of this. Then it becomes a playable game. And it's certainly true. If you've got a high-end Amiga, and it would need to be high-end, even the stock 1200 struggled with this, then it's a whole different experience. If you're rocking a 4000 with a 68060 accelerator, it's as smooth as silk and the whole universe opens up before you if you can work out how to take off. It's a game that was absolutely loaded with content, a whole assembly coded procedurally generated cosmos stuffed into a single floppy disk, technically groundbreaking and a long way ahead of its time, a game that has many fans, a game that people rave about on message boards to this day. But it's also a game that has the frame rate of a desk calendar on most Amigas. And this is the problem, because it's only when you start arbitrarily extending the limits of the Amiga does this game actually become a contender, kind of the opposite of what I was aiming for in this video. Not so much pushing limited hardware as it was forcing you to upgrade it. So for now I'm going to leave this one here with some relief, because Lord, this looks like it might give the old brain gears a real grinding. But I do think this is a game that I will come back to, maybe in another video about those aforementioned high-end Amigas. So yes, this is the actual ending. Thanks so much for watching, thanks for getting this far. If you can think of any more games that I should look at, maybe some that did require an Amiga with a bit more power under the bonnet to run, then do let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.